Hello, everybody. My name's Derry, and thank you all for joining today. I'm going to be walking you through how platform teams can enable true self-service for developers using an IDP, using CircleCI, and using Terraform under the hood. You're going to see this live, and we're going to see this end to end. So, bit of an introduction to myself. As I mentioned, my name's Derry Bradley. I'm a field engineer here at CircleCI. I've been working here for the best part of 4 years now, which is crazy to think about. I'm sure my boss Eddie, who's on the call, is also shocked when I say that. But I've been working in the space of software delivery for about 6 or 7 years now, primarily as a platform team engineer, helping developers roll out CI/CD integrations, Kubernetes integrations, and governance gates, etc., all of that good stuff. So I do understand the story of a platform engineer and what a lot of you folks are trying to achieve on the call today. And I guess that's why why I'm here to run this session. But a bit of a fun fact about myself before we get into it all. I did work in construction before my role, before I changed my career and moved into software engineering. I worked in different cities across North America, as you can see on the screen here, particularly that middle photo with all the snow. It'll probably give you all a good indication of why I chose to go back to university and ended up where I am here today. Folks want to, while I'm writing, please feel free to share in chat where folks are dialing in from, as I'm just giving this overview, where you're dialing in from, maybe what's the local beer, where you're from, and also what's your current role in the organization. So feel free to share that all in chat. And again, what's the goal of today's session? We want to let developers move fast with those paved paths, while platform teams are able to stay in control with automation and with guardrails. So I see some folks calling in from Spain. Awesome. From Hamburg. Some folks don't drink. That's no problem whatsoever. As you can tell from my accent, I'm Irish, so we are fond of a drink every now and then. I see some folks there. Dublin, Ireland. Awesome. Great. Barcelona on the Irish. That's very Irish of you. So yeah, great to see that you're all able to hear me also, which is awesome. And folks from all over the world. So yeah, super excited to get into this today. And yeah, let's kick it off. So I guess the agenda, just a high level breakdown of what we're going to do today. Want to quickly go over the problem. What is the problem when developers are trying to provision projects today? We're then going to get into that self-service experience demo, and I guess really look at that end-to-end story that we're trying to tell from IDP to CircleCI, leveraging Terraform to provision projects with those guardrails and best practices in place. And then we'll get into the code. We'll look at how the infrastructure as code is set up with the Terraform. We'll look at some cool functionality from CircleCI in terms of templating and overrides. And then we'll look at what this means for developer experience, while also highlighting the guardrail capabilities that platform teams can also enable. Fortunately, I do have Eddie on the call here to answer some questions, so feel free to drop questions in the Q&A option as we go along. But if there's anything general that you just want to kind of contribute to the session, feel free to add it to chat, and feel free to add it to chat, I should say, and then also, yeah, I'll probably look for some interactive, I guess, kind of questions, get some folks involved through that chat option as we go along. And okay, let's move along. So I guess the problem, and if we're able to kick off, my colleague at PlatformCon is going to try trigger a poll here now. Awesome that we're able to get the first one up and running. So feel free, as I'm kind of going over the problem, to address this poll. How long does it currently take you to go from to get a repo, a pipeline, project configured with guardrails and secrets set up in your organization? I think we're actually looking at I think we might actually have the wrong poll question up. That's kind of going on the live poll, but that's not to worry. Feel free to answer your question, put your questions into the chat. How long does it currently take? Oh, I think we see our poll is now up and running, so that's absolutely great. Again, how long does it take to go from idea to provisioning a pipeline and actually have a pipeline up and running in your current setup today? And the reason I guess that we're kind of like addressing this, okay, and the problem that we're really looking into is that developer pain. Is that oh, I think I went too far. Let's go back to slide 5. What we're really talking about here is today, imagine I'm a developer and I'm trying to spin up a project. Okay, what do I need to do? In many organizations that I've worked in, I see a lot of, I see answers coming in here. We're kind of averaging out around less than 1 day. So I'm a developer. What I've had to do before is to spin up a new service. I might have to ping a platform team on Slack. I might have to open a Jira ticket, and then I might have to wait maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe even longer. There is some folks saying longer in there. And I came from a large scale platform team, a large kind of financial institution. So I understand the pain points in some organizations and what it takes to spin up projects, especially when you're waiting on a platform team, waiting on somebody else to wire up secrets, repos, and pipelines. It can be very slow. But today we're going to show you how we can fix that. We're going to use Port as the developer portal, or the IDP, but this does not need to be Port. This can be Port, Cortex, Backstage, or some homegrown IDP that you would use that you might use already. And I'm also going to show you how you might just use CircleCI's UI as that self-service portal. We're going to use CircleCI for the automation under the hood, and then Terraform to orchestrate it all. Okay, so we're going to show devs how to go from 0 to CI/CD with no tickets. And for folks who might not know what an IDP or an internal developer portal is, it's that kind of single source of truth where developers can go to spin up different tooling that is used across their organization, or get information back from that tooling across their organization, because maybe a platform team or an organization do not want their developers to have to go to 10 or 15 different services or products that they use, and then understand those products to get them spun up and start using and get information back from those products. It's a single source of truth that can be used, that a lot of platform engineering teams are starting to use and explore. Am I able to share? I have to share the results of the poll. Oh, I do apologize. So you can probably see the results of the first poll. So yeah, a lot of folks in the less than 1 day, but then again, longer, 37%. So it's actually equal. So yeah, we're going to show you today how we can start to fix that. I exit this. Just look at it. And jumping over to the next slide. There should see another poll should be ready to spin up on the screen here now. So how do developers currently get a new service up and running in your organization? Okay, please feel free to fill that out as I go through some of these slides. So spinning up a new service, as I mentioned, what it can look like. Somebody pings somebody in Slack. Hey, can somebody help me create a new repo? You're at the mercy of somebody else noticing and responding. Then they might ask you to file a ticket on Jira, assign it to a platform team and a vague description, and then also hope for the best. Now you wait, sometimes hours, and as many folks who responded to the first poll already mentioned, sometimes days. Step 3, eventually somebody wires up the repo, sets up the pipeline, provisions the secrets, and pastes in some baseline config. And then step 4, you're still not done. You need to copy the pipeline.yaml or the CI/CD configuration from another repo that kind of works there, tweaking it as necessary until it does work in your new project. This is the norm across many organizations that we speak to, but it certainly should not be. It's slow, it's risky, it kills productivity, and of course, it kills developers' happiness. I don't think I'm not sure if I didn't see that's the second poll come up. But yeah, again, if the poll does not come up, it might be just ready. Feel free to drop your answers in chat. So again, how do developers currently set up a new service in your CI/CD in your organization today? Is that a manual ticket? Do they copy it from another repo? Do platform teams create it? Or we've already automated this. I get the idea from the answer to the first poll, that folks probably don't have it automated. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what folks are doing, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as I go through the slides. So what are the consequences of sticking with kind of this slow process that I just walked through, that I experienced when I was a dev and when I was a software developer before? Okay, first, the first issue is really the time to value is delayed. Developers lose days waiting for environments to be spun up, pipelines be wired, secrets provisions, and all of that. That's time not that's time that they aren't spent not shipping code, not shipping value, and time spent in limbo. Second, it leads to shadow pipelines and drift. So when the platform team can't move fast enough, devs are going to go DIY. We all know that. Okay. And what happens then is there's no consistency, there's no guarantees, and it's config drift in real time. The third point is that leads to platform team burnout, as every new project needs a ticket, Slack thread, a manual setup, and that, as we all know as platform engineers, scales horribly. Your most experienced platform engineers end up doing ticket ops, and that's not what they were hired for. And finally, what I want to highlight is the security risks. When governance takes too long, teams will look to go around it. Now, you've got unknown repos, now unknown pipelines, and potentially open wide deploys. That's just not a DevOps problem. It's an audit risk problem for your organization. And this is why self-service isn't a nice to have, it's table stakes, and it's table stakes for your competition as well. So again, feel free, let me take a look to see if anybody responded to the last question. Self-service, awesome. Cool. So we're moving on to the next slide here. We do have some questions that are starting. We have another question that's popping up. So I introduced the idea of an internal developer portal. Okay. Are any folks using that today? And if so, what one? Maybe it's on your agenda, maybe it's not on your agenda, but feel free to write in the chat if you are using it today. Awesome. I see some folks using Port. So introducing the tool stack for today's demo, we're going to be leveraging Port as the IDP, but please remember that we can interchange these with any IDP that you're using, Cortex, Backstage, or any homegrown solution, Terraform as the orchestrator, and CircleCI as the automation engine under the hood. Different trend is good. Okay, cool. So there is some folks, that's quite a few using Port, which is awesome as well. That's cool, exciting to see. You might understand or recognize the Port UI when I pull it up in a few minutes. And then moving into the flow of what we're going to use today. So the developer is going to fill out a form. It's going to be on Port, as we mentioned already. They're going to provide a template that they want to use, or provide the name of the template that they want to use, which we'll take a look at, and the name of the repo that they're going to create. We're going to send a webhook to CircleCI, which is the automation engine. Now, that's going to pull configs from a centralized, maintained repo by that platform team, which again CircleCI executes the pipeline, leverages Terraform to create a GitHub repo and provision that project on CircleCI. However, the project and the CI config that is used is owned, maintained, and hydrated by that platform team, but we're going to give the developers that ability to customize it. And we're going to see how we do that in just a few moments. And now it's time to get into the demo. But before I do that, a quick question for everybody. How many folks on the call have used CircleCI before? Maybe you used it today. Okay, I think we actually have that poll up and running. Never used CircleCI. What is CircleCI? Awesome. This is what we want to hear. Lots of folks who are going to see the platform for the first time. And again, high response rate, so I do appreciate that. So CircleCI, for folks who don't know, is a CI/CD tool. We're in the space of software delivery, and we're able to help. We're going to help you. We're going to show you today how CircleCI can help you get your developers set up and provisioning projects. But that's not just where we operate. We operate in the world of CI/CD. So if you're building, testing, deploying, and building, testing, and deploying applications across the board, CircleCI is going to be your best friend, and I'm going to show you how that is today. However, kicking off today with the provisioning story. So instead of filing tickets, the developer is going to open Port. This is where developers can come to use that portal as a self-service portal that we spoke about already to set up and provision projects with CircleCI configured out of the box. this is a self-service action on port, and all it's going to do is send a webhook to CircleCI. What I need to do is, as a developer, to set up a project is hit create. I can choose from the different templates that I have configured in a centralized repository, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. I have a Python starter template and I have a node in this example. I'm going to choose Python, and the name of the repo or the service that I want to create for this demo is going to be a user registration service. Okay, I hit execute, and that's it. I can see my port job has spun up. I can see it has successfully sent the webhook to CircleCI. So in about 2 minutes, everything is going to be ready to go. The automation, as I mentioned, is going to create a GitHub repo with boilerplate code and CircleCI templating. And again, why are we doing this? Why is this self-service methodology so important? Because we want to give developers the ability to operate above the value line, focus on delivering value to their customers, and let platform teams handle this below the value line stuff as much as possible. So what's happening under the hood, as I mentioned already, is that port sends a webhook to CircleCI to provision, to start that provisioning pipeline. Okay, and if I jump in to look at that pipeline here, this is CircleCI's UI, and this is our pipeline dashboard where you can get a bird's eye view of everything going on across your organization. You can see here that I'm in the platform team's config project, and you can see that my provision pipeline has run, it has executed, and it just took 51 seconds. However, just to show you while we're on this page, if you do want to bypass the idea of leveraging an IDP, I could just come in here, choose the branch, and leverage CircleCI as that self-service window. And we can see here I have my provision pipeline, I have a deep provision pipeline, and I have a config policies pipeline, which I can get into what that is later on in the conversation. But all I would need to do is open up the provision pipeline, and again, provide the name of the, there. And again, if I want to do a deep provision or a provision, I can just come in here and provide the name of the repo that I want to provision, and everything should work just fine as well, if you don't want to go through the trouble of configuring an IDP for this. Okay, so let's take a look at what this pipeline actually did under the hood. Okay, so it's going to leverage Terraform to pull in a GitHub repo template, which has best practices already defined. And just for folks who are unaware of CircleCI, I should just highlight that this is basically a workflow. If I had multiple jobs in here, I would be able to see that. This is a job on CircleCI in this box. We can see the execution environment defined at the top. It's a Docker resource class size, but this is a Docker resource with a large resource class size, but this could be Windows, this could be Mac, you could bring your own self-hosted runner, or of course, it could be Linux. Okay, but anyway, this job, going back to what this job is actually doing, all of these boxes, little boxes that we see on the screen, are just individual steps. And what this job is doing, as I mentioned, is going to leverage Terraform. It's going to pull in a GitHub repo template, which has best practices defined by our organization, built in, and also some boilerplate code. And the GitHub repo template that I'm going to use in this example is just here. It's a Python starter template baseline. Okay, and as I mentioned, it has boilerplate code already out of the box, and it does have some CircleCI configuration, and we'll take a look at what that does later on in the conversation. We're going to create a new repository out of this. Okay, and then once it creates that repository on GitHub, it's going to configure the project on CircleCI. Okay, so it's going to set up the project on CircleCI with this Terraform apply. It's going to provision contexts, which are shared environment variables or shared secrets at the organization level in CircleCI. The Terraform, leveraging the CircleCI Terraform provider, is then also going to set up the pipelines and triggers on CircleCI. And it's also going to wire up the pipelines leveraging config templates. And what config templates are is that baseline that a platform team can provide to their developers to then go and work off. The important thing to note here is that in this provisioning pipeline, it's all infrastructure as code. So there was no CLI or manual steps. And we'll dive into what this Terraform code looks like later on in the conversation. But if I go to, let's jump over to that newly created project on CircleCI. So if I go to my organization home, we created a project called the user registration service, okay? And we can see that a pipeline has already run in this project. So this is the newly created project, again, pointing to that GitHub repo, which we'll take a look at in a few moments. And I guess what we can see here is that we did trigger an empty commit to kick off the first build. We just want to show that it's live. And let's take a look at what the pipeline entails. We have 3 jobs. We have a build job, we have a test job, and we also have a deploy job. Okay, and all of this is defined inside the platform teams config. Let's take a look at what that platform teams config repo looks like right now. Just going to take a quick look at the chat to make sure that everything is all good. Awesome. So I don't see anything to address right now. So all of this configuration that we triggered in the provision pipeline is going to be defined inside of this platform teams config repository. Okay, and this is where everything's configured. So it contains standardized language-based CI/CD templates, which we'll dive into later on in the conversation in a bit more detail. And it also contains the Terraform code that was used to configure the provisioning and the setup of the project that we just looked at. We'll dive into what that Terraform code looks like later on in the conversation. But one thing to note is that we're also showing off centralized configuration management here at CircleCI. So the config used in the project that we set up, the user registration service, is actually living inside our config templates directory here in our platform teams config. So this acts as a baseline that development team will then go and use. And the development team can then override that config if needed from the newly created project. The newly created project should be created in our CircleCI Labs organization. So if I jump into the user registration service here, this is the newly created project. We notice that it is a mirror of what we had in the starter template, as this is this is the template that we used. It's a Python starter template, and what it does is it's kind of built out with best by that platform team. And when it comes to PEP standards, pre-commit hooks, with testing and linting already built in, and Docker support for containerized builds. Okay, we'll also see that there's a baseline CircleCI file in here that developers were able to go and basically edit, that came originally from the template in the platform team repository. And if we jump over back to CircleCI, we can see the user registration service. If I go to my settings and I look at the pipeline that was created by the Terraform provider, we can see that the config source points to the platform teams config. So that's the baseline config, the baseline CI/CD config provided by the platform team. But the checkout source of the code is always going to be the new repository that we just created. So I guess from the developer's perspective, one thing to highlight here, they went from an idea to running a pipeline in under 2 minutes. I know a lot of folks at the start of the call said longer than a couple of days. Very few folks, I don't know if anybody said under 1 hour, but a lot of folks were kind of in that less than a day or even longer than 2 days. Okay, but with what we just showed you, developers went from that idea to writing code with a running pipeline in less than 2 minutes. There was no tickets, no waiting, and the platform team didn't need to lift a finger. So it's a scalable, self-service, and it's also secure. So this is platform engineering done right. You've got port or whatever IDP that you folks decide to use as the UI or the UX. You have Terraform as the orchestrator, and CircleCI is the automation engine under the hood. Developers are able to move fast, and platform teams stay in control. with this kind of format, everybody is able to win. And again, let's just highlight here why self-service matters. Developers don't wait. They don't need to file tickets or chase down Slack threads. Just open the portal and hit create. Platform teams don't need to handhold. You're not stuck provisioning every service manually. You define the standard once in code and then it applies everywhere. Guardrails are baked in. Whatever the platform team defines in that baseline config, in that template config in their repository, that is baked into the developers. We'll see how they can give into the developers config. We'll see in a few moments how they can give developers the ability to override what is inside that config, or maybe they don't want to give the developers that ability at all. And finally, they get velocity and governance. You don't have to trade speed for control. You get both, and the developers team can continue to move fast. And that's the win. That's the platform team's dream. And yes, we can do it on CircleCI. I just seen that my video was spotlight. I don't think that changed anything for us, however. Okay, so what we're going to do now is quickly or begin to walk through our infrastructure or our Terraform as code. But however, let's get it. If we can get that poll up, that would be awesome. If not, and the poll is regarding, so when your team needs to provision new infrastructure, what's the current process? Are you manually assigning that in AWS or any kind of cloud console that you're using? Custom scripts. I see folks are using Terraform. A lot of folks using Terraform, which is great. Give it a couple of minutes to go through, because I guess in this part of the demo, what I really want to show you is how we turn CircleCI pipeline provisioning into a fully automated self-service flow, leveraging Terraform providers under the hood. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of folks are using Terraform or another form of IAC tools, which is absolutely great. Let's take a look at what our Terraform code looks like, I should say, in our platform teams repo. So first thing to probably highlight is in our CircleCI folder, you will see that we have our app.tf.files. And this is basically just going to store some input variables and provisioning logic specific to CircleCI. Our config templates, as we mentioned already, stores the reusable config.yaml for the different Python or Node applications, depending what kind of language-based CI/CD pipeline that you're looking for. We're going to provide our developers with these templates out of the box. In our Terraform directory, we have our core Terraform logic for our 3 Terraform providers that we're using, which are the CircleCI Terraform provider, the GitHub Terraform provider, and also the AWS Terraform provider. And we've also got a directory here for policies, where we're able to define guardrails, orbs, for basically shared logic across, just another way at CircleCI that we can share logic across our organization, and then also our documentation. Okay, so this structure, from our experience and from working with platform teams leveraging a similar structure, makes it easy for platform teams to manage reusable patterns and for app teams then to onboard fast with low level concerns. The first file that I want to dive into to show you is our app.tf vars folder, as provisioning starts with just a few key inputs in this file. You can see that we have our org info block. This basically sets the CircleCI org information. And then also we have our app team pipeline profiles. And this is our main block describing our new application, where we can give it an app name, which config template to use, where we saw the Python or the Node one, to create a context, which again are shared secrets at CircleCI across the organization, at the organization level, and maybe some context restrictions, how we want to start to restrict those secrets, and then also some of the values themselves. Moving down to our core Terraform logic, let's see what's going on in our main.terraform file, because this is where all the provisioning happens. When somebody fills out that form on port, when somebody fills out that form on port and clicks create, here's exactly how the Terraform works behind the scenes. First, it gathers all the information that it needs, such as the GitHub repo name, gets existing CircleCI contexts, figures out which config template to use, and then it creates the GitHub repo using our starter template, which we would have defined. This is basically Terraform, I guess, just figuring out the pieces that it needs before it starts to build. The second part of this main Terraform script is the provisioning of the CircleCI project. Okay, this is how it sets up the CI/CD. It's going to create the CircleCI project for the new application, leveraging the CircleCI Terraform provider. It then creates a new unique context for the application, which are those secrets that we were talking about, and then it injects those environment variables securely. Okay, so the easy thing here, the thing that's really nice here, is that every project gets its own isolated context. So secrets never leak between applications. Then it's going to create some context restrictions, which is also really important. So what we're doing here is we're introducing branch rules, for example, only allowing production secrets on the main branch. It then adds some project level restrictions, and also it's going to configure some user permissions in here too. Okay, so we're automating access controls here that previously had to be done manually. So there's no more Slack messaging saying, hey, can you give me access to that production context? It's all handled automatically based on rules. And then finally, we're going to create the pipelines on CircleCI. Okay, so now Terraform can actually go and build the CI/CD pipelines. So we're going to define what the pipeline is using the config.yaml. It's going to point to the newly created GitHub repo, so everything is connected automatically here. And then finally, we're going to ensure configs are versioned and fully traceable. So the developer out of the box gets that working pipeline that follows all of our organizational standards, but they didn't need to learn CircleCI configuration or guess at what best practices are for our organization. And finally, what we can see at the bottom here is we're going to set up the trigger so that a push to main automatically kicks off the CI/CD pipeline. And that's kind of it. After this, in about 2 minutes, we've gone from submission to a fully functional development environment with CI/CD, security controls, and best practices all built in. And we saw that at the start when we triggered the pipeline. Okay, some, I guess, other things just to probably highlight in this repo are the outputs. So any metadata that we do want to get access to is going to be available inside this repo. The providers that we used, as I mentioned, we used the CircleCI provider, we used the GitHub provider to create the repo, and then also we used the Terraform provider. That's probably important to highlight also here, is because we store state, the Terraform state, in S3 with DynamoDB locks to prevent concurrent applies. Again, this is a really cool setup when we're looking to share use by multiple engineers or multiple automation. So again, that was just a high-level overview of how the Terraform works, how it's configured, and how you can leverage this, in your own environment as well to set up something similar. The next exciting thing that we really want to walk through is the templating and override functionality that CircleCI has recently brought out. So how does your team currently manage CI/CD pipeline configurations today? Are you able to leverage centralized pipelines? Are you just copy and pasting between different projects? This is where things get really interesting and really powerful, I guess, on CircleCI, because we've already seen the automated project creation, but how do we ensure consistency across multiple projects while giving developers that flexibility that they need? So awesome. I see a lot of folks are using centralized templates and shared configs already. I see about 34% of folks, are maintaining their own, and some folks are copying and pasting. And that's okay because we can show you how we can resolve that on CircleCI. And again, probably just to re-emphasize the fact that traditional CI/CD might have two problems. The copy and paste configs, which leads to inconsistency, it leads to drift, and it can lead to maintenance nightmares. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call know. Or too rigid templates. Developers can't customize for their specific needs. And we need both standardization and flexibility. So let's dive in to how we can do that. So looking at our platform teams config repository, we can see in the configs template directory that we do have, this is where our centralized templates are going to live. And we've different templates for different stacks. We've Python for the Django, Flask applications, Node for React applications, maybe Docker for containerized services, and we do have a baseline for generic projects. But each template, the important thing to note here is that what this enables you is that you can provide a template that will embed your organization's best practice, maybe your security scans, maybe your guardrails, maybe your deployment gates. And the beauty from a developer's perspective is teams don't need to become CI/CD experts. They just come in here and pick the right template. Let's look at the Python template that we leveraged for this example. Okay, so we'll notice that this isn't, for those folks who've used CircleCI before, it isn't a typical CircleCI config, or it isn't a typical CircleCI config to date, because there's a new override key in here. Okay, and this is what makes this whole process that we're walking through today extremely powerful. So we'll see in the build jobs. Now, maybe in your real life or in your production ready CircleCI, in your production ready CI configurations, your build job, your test job, your deploy job, maybe you'll have governance gate jobs or security scans in here that are a bit more meaningful to the baseline that we provided here. Okay, we'll also see that in the build, test, and deploy jobs, we have this override with key. If I didn't provide this override with key, the developer would not be able to override it, and they must use whatever is defined inside this config, inside our centralized repository. However, because I provided an override with key, the developers are going to be able to provide what they want to happen inside each of these jobs. Okay, again, if it didn't have override key, maybe your security scan job, your deployment approval gates, or your compliance requirements, you wouldn't provide that override key. So platform teams control what's mandatory versus what's customizable. Let's take a look at what the development team is going to use. And if I jump into the so this is the newly created service. If I jump into the CircleCI config inside that repository, what we're going to notice is this is not a traditional CircleCI, this is not a traditional or a CircleCI config that you would be used to, because this is a URL orb. Okay, and a URL orb is basically a game changer, because instead of publishing orbs, which are CircleCI's configuration as code that enable you to integrate with third-party tools or share config across different projects, but you do need to publish an orb. With a URL orb, instead of publishing them to the CircleCI registry or your own private registry, we can reference configs directly from our Git repository. So we can see in the platform team repository when this config is checked out, or when this config, I should say, is pointed to in our application project on CircleCI. Here, what we're doing is pointing to the URL orb that exists inside this repository. Okay, so we can reference configs directly from our Git repositories. And what that means is it means instant updates, it means version control for your URL orbs, and it means easy sharing. Okay, now let's see how developers decided to customize the config baseline provided by the platform team. We can see that they decided to override the build job, and they decided to override the test job. What you'll notice, however, though, is that the deploy job is not defined in here. So the deploy job is going to stay as default. Okay, so they're just going to inherit everything from that platform team. And why developers like this is because they get flexibility when they need it, but they get consistency everywhere else. And what that looks like from a UI perspective, if I go back, this is my newly created user registration service. Let me take a look at that. Let me take a look at the first pipeline that was created when we sent that empty commit. We can see that we have a build job, we have a test job and a deploy job. The build job has the config that we just walked through. Okay, so that customized config by the dev team. So does the test job, which we can take a look at here. However, what we will notice is that the deploy job is going to inherit everything from that centralized location. Okay, so I hope you're starting to understand this, I guess, get an idea of how this process can scale. As for platform teams, they can provide centralized templates to ensure consistency across all projects. It gives them the ability to introduce and implement the governance decided by the organization. It can easily be updated in a centralized location by a platform team, and also it provides visibility for that platform team as to what is going on. From the developer's perspective, it means quick onboarding, it means flexibility, no CI/CD expertise required, and they know that they're always compliant with what was defined by that centralized team. And for the organization as a whole, it's something that can scale in a secure and efficient manner. And this is platform engineering at its finest. This is a system where the paved road is actually the easiest path, as teams get speed, safety, and flexibility. And platform teams get consistency without becoming a bottleneck or a blocker to the wider development organization. And again, the magic ingredient here is CircleCI's URL orb functionality combined with the override capabilities. This lets us achieve something that was previously not possible. And of course, standardization and flexibility do equal to scale. So I guess, where do we want to go with this? Here's a poll. What have we asked this question yet? So how much control do folks today want to give their developers over their CI/CD pipelines? Feel free to, I guess, let us know what you think. Like, do you want to give your developers the ability to write all of their configs? Do you want to give them some customization? And again, please feel to share in chat if this is something that you are doing today with what you just saw. If it's something that you would like to see introduced in your organization in the future. Customization with guardrails. Awesome. Cool. And I guess we can probably jump into some of the I think it makes sense to jump into some of the guardrails functionality first. So the winner was some customization. So the ability, some folks, but a high proportion of folks did kind of say they must use standardized templates. They don't want to give those developers that ability. And I guess with this templating and overrides functionality that we just walked through, we saw how you can do both. So whatever your organization standards or best practices are defined inside your org, we're able to leverage both. We're able to leverage both approaches, with what we just saw. We'll come back to developer experience, and we're going to stick with guardrails actually for the moment. So we were able to basically show folks how to make developers move fast with self-service provisioning. But a critical question for a lot of platform engineers and a lot of DevSecOps folks is basically, how do you maintain security, compliance, and standards where everybody can go, when everybody, like we just saw, can go and create their own pipelines? And also, like provisioning, traditional governance also has a problem. It's either too rigid or it can be too loose. We need guardrails that are automatic, invisible, and impossible to bypass for our engineers. And let's show you how we can look at that, how we can explore that on CircleCI. The first concept that I want to introduce is config policies at CircleCI. So config policies leverage open policy agent under the hood to define policies that live inside your organization. You can write these policies, and if a developer triggers a build with a CI config that does not comply with your policy, you can fail the build with a hard failure, or you can just define a soft failure. And a soft failure will just spit out a warning to a developer, which we'll see in a few moments. In our policies repository, in our policies directory, in our platform teams repository, we can see we have one policy active for the purpose of this demo, and all it's going to do is basically define what Python versions need to be used for your Docker images. However, if it's inside a config, if it's inside a CircleCI config, you're able to basically lock it down with a config policy. Take branch-based secrets, think resource class usage if you want to. I guess there's cost benefits to config policies, but there's also that security and governance. They're written in Rego. This is the policy language that powers Open Policy Agent, but don't worry too much about the syntax. Let's just focus on what it does. And what we can see here is that the policy that is active on the organization where our newly created user registration service was created has a policy that defines the Python, that defines what Python images developers should be using. This is a soft failure, so it's not going to fail the build. All it's going to do is give the developer the feedback. The build can continue, but the platform gets visibility into compliance, and the developer knows then, for this use case, that they need to go and update the policy. Update their image to be compliant with the platform team's guidelines. However, this could have been a hard failure. So the platform team can define to just block this build, and then the build will not be triggered. So again, giving platform teams the ability to, I guess, provide the developers with the guardrails that are needed to keep the organization happy. Config policy and all the policies that live at the organization level, and they can be viewed in your organization settings on CircleCI. We're leveraging the VCS here to manage, maintain, roll out, and scale your policies, and we highly recommend doing that too. And we have some cool blogs, we've got some cool documentation on how you can do that today. After config policies, I want to briefly introduce the idea of secrets, because when you're connecting into clouds, the old way was always to store AWS keys, database passwords, and maybe API tokens inside CircleCI. The new way is OIDC, and it's OpenID Connect. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call may have heard of that already. And CircleCI is an OIDC provider. So when we were provisioning the infrastructure, if you'll remember, I mentioned that we were leveraging I apologize, that we were leveraging AWS and S3 to store Terraform state. So when our platform team, the platform team itself is actually using OIDC here. And when CircleCI runs, our Terraform provisioning pipeline uses OIDC to connect in to AWS, because our Terraform state, as I already mentioned, is stored securely in S3 with those DynamoDB locks for concurrency. Okay, so again, no secrets stored inside CircleCI to connect in to AWS in this use case. And this is vitally important when it comes to guardrails, as they can expire in minutes. You can scope your OIDC to specific actions, and you can leave a complete audit trail so everybody inside your organization is happy and content with how we're connecting into the cloud. A third point that I want to touch on when it comes to guardrails is context. I mentioned context a couple of times throughout the conversation, as they let us implement defense in depth across our organization. They're much more powerful than just secret storage, as they are complete access control, as these are basically provide environment variables. They're shared environment variables across your organization. So if I go to my project settings up here, actually if I go to my I'll go to project settings. I can see the environment variable, so you can define secrets at the organization level if you would like to. We can see that somewhere injected here for the purpose of the demo. I'm in the platform teams config here. And if I look at my contexts, what we can see are the shared groupings of environment variables that exist across the organization. Okay, if I use the one that we just created, let's jump in to take a look at what is in this context. We can see that there's two secrets that were created by our Terraform provider. And this is where context can really become powerful because we're able to implement branch-based security. And what this means is that feature branches, they'll get development context only. Main branches will get production context only. And there's no manual approval needed when you have this policy, when you have this methodology in place. You can also see here that we can use expression-based restrictions when it comes to our contexts, and also up the top here, you can lock down context to a particular project. So if you only want to access these secrets they give access to certain secrets to a particular service, that is also absolutely possible. And the last thing to probably just highlight again is the template-based guardrails. So we spoke about OIDC, we spoke about context, and we spoke about config policies, but with our templates that we explored with our Python templates, etc. Because every template will basically include what the platform team or what the DevSecOps team has defined. This gives you the ability to, I guess, introduce things like mandatory security scans, non-overridable steps, and then also compliance reporting. So again, another very core way, another very crucial way that you can roll out guardrails at scale across your organization for your developers. Now, I know I skipped developer experience. Oh, that's gone the wrong way. But I do want to go back. I think we've 35 minutes left, so we've got maybe 10 or 15 minutes more of content, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So when it comes to developer experience, what are your developers' biggest daily frustration? What do you hear the most? Awesome. So we see, I guess the one the most, all of the above is pretty high, 25%. We can see context switching, etc. And figuring out why build fails. So we're in this part of the conversation, we're going to flip perspectives. We've seen how platform teams can create this self-service magic, but what does it actually feel like being a developer in this world? So remember the user registration service that we created at the start. Let's jump over to look at what that looks like. What that looks like again from a GitHub perspective, as we're going to clone this repo down and we're going to open it up inside of Cursor. Okay, so this project is ready to go. The CI/CD is configured and now the real work begins. So I'm going to open up Cursor. Give me a new window, please. I'm going to have to stop and I think reshare my screen, which I'll do in just a moment. Bear with me now. Make sure that the clone works okay, perfect. I'll stop sharing and reshare my screen with that cursor window. And okay, so we can share multiple windows here. Awesome. Okay, you're looking at the user registration service and you should be looking at the cursor window here. I'm going to open up the project that I just cloned down, the user registration service, which is great. So now I'm a developer. Inside my development environment, inside Cursor, I've got my AI friend in the corner. When I need to interact, I can interact with Claude, and I'm going to show you how we can start to interact with CircleCI from Claude in a few moments. First things first, let's take a look at our code here. We've got our baseline config that we just took a look at from GitHub. We've got our baseline CircleCI config. Everything's ready to go. We're ready to start developing. If I jump over to my CircleCI IDE extension, we can see that there's no project detected, which is not exactly what we're looking for off the bat. Maybe I need to follow it over in the CircleCI UI first. CI from teams configs. So we're going to follow this project, pipelines, projects. I'm going to follow this user registration service. I'm going to jump back over to here we can see, and now we can see this perfectly. I was expecting a follow button to come up here in my IDE extension, which it usually does. It didn't in that time. So the developer might have had to jump over to the UI to follow the project, but usually they can follow it from here. So this is the CircleCI IDE extension. So everything that you can see inside the UI when it comes to pipelines, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to steps, the developer is going to get access to that here inside the IDE. So this is the initial pipeline that was triggered on that commit that on that kind of empty commit that we first triggered at the beginning of the demo. But let's trigger a couple of pipelines here just to see what that looks like. So again, I'm going to open my terminal. Just have to check something like Git. Let's trigger an empty commit and trigger a build. I'm going to trigger a build like that, and what I'm also going to do while I'm talking, I'm going to trigger a build with an error because I want to show you what it looks like when there are errors and how we can start to fix that. Add in a typo, status, pick it up, yep. Git commit, trigger build with something in the way of my screen. Trigger build with, oh, error. Now we'll push that up. Okay. Jumping back over to the CircleCI IDE extension, what we should start to see upon a refresh is those pipelines triggering in CircleCI. You can see the first one is up and running. So straight away, the benefit of this to a developer, when I'm building, when I'm iterating on my applications, I don't need to switch contexts. I don't need to jump over to the CircleCI UI. I'm able to get access to everything that I need from an individual pipeline here within the UI, which is absolutely awesome. Okay, I can get access to the build logs, everything that you would have seen inside the UI, I'm able to get access to here inside my IDE. So if you're from a developer's perspective, absolutely awesome when it comes to, I guess, developer happiness, developer productivity. I don't need to switch tools. I don't need to context switch, go on to Sky Sports News or go on to YouTube and start listening to music as I go over to my Google Chrome. I'm able to get access to everything inside this single window. Yeah, let's take a look at our test job here. As I was hoping to see another pipeline trigger there. Actually, just the one triggered. I wonder did this pick up the one of the failure, or maybe I didn't push up. Thought I did. Yeah, awesome. So the reason that I want to show you a failure is from a developer's experience perspective. How can we start to debug things in CircleCI when things go wrong? What we're able to do is awesome. This was the failure. So I'm able to see all of my build fail logs, which is absolutely great. However, what can I do next? You can see that I can rerun the job. If I go over to the CircleCI UI, which you might want to do as a developer to do a little bit more, I guess, to diving into why a pipeline has failed. Jumping in here, you can see the build test that failed, but you can rerun the workflow from the start. You can rerun the workflow from failed. You can also SSH into the job, which you can also do from the IDE actually, but I just wanted to highlight this feature to you here now. You can also rerun just failed tests. So if you have a long testing suite, only 10 tests fail, let's just rerun those failed tests. But I guess the gem that I really wanted to show you all today is leveraging the CircleCI MCP server to help us debug why a pipeline might have failed. So let's ask Claude, hey, can you tell me why my last pipeline failed? And again, this is leveraging the CircleCI MCP server. This is going to leverage the CircleCI MCP server. Oh, stop. Let me open a new window actually on this. Hey Claude, can you tell me why my Last pipeline on CircleCI failed. What we should see here is we should see Claude return to us. Yeah, okay, awesome. So we're up and running, we're working here. So CircleCI is this is leveraging the CircleCI MCP server to list our followed projects. It should be able to access, it should start to ask me, I don't know why it's asking me these questions actually. It should just return the build failure logs. Give me the option to return build failure logs. Let me see, can you return the build failure logs for my last pipeline? I don't know why we're getting stuck on that git remote URL, but let's see. Hopefully this will work this time for the purpose of the demo. And if not, we're going to have to conclude that Claude isn't acting very nice, unfortunately. That is not ideal. However, with the CircleCI MCP server, when we are up and running, I wonder, do I have another Claude? Yeah. Let me see if I can change the agent to work with auto, maybe, instead of just focusing on Claude. Hello there. Is the MCP server working today for CircleCI? And if this doesn't work, I'm going to try one more thing and opening a new window. Replace the chat. Let's see if this works. Hello, it's the CircleCI MCP server. Awesome. What I want you to do, can you tell me why my last build failed? Please list all the followed projects. Now this is an action of the CircleCI MCP server. Okay, I can see that you're following major projects CircleCI. Okay, you shouldn't be asking me this much information, but we will illustration service get build failure logs. Finally, I hope folks are still on the call. But it looks like your last failure failed because of a syntax error, which is absolute. To fix the build, check line 14. Okay, I'm gonna ask it, can you fix it for me? Maybe it was Claude. Awesome, it's provided that fix. Let's jump in to see if it did so in the file. We can accept that. Git status. Let's add it up, and you can see there how leveraging the CircleCI MCP server, leveraging your AI chatbot in the friend when it decides to work with us, we're able to quickly debug what might be failing inside our configs, what might be failing inside our pipelines, and then get up and running and get back to green as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's basically that's what I really wanted to show you from a developer experience perspective on CircleCI. You're opening up your ID, you're getting access to all of your pipeline information inside CircleCI, and you're leveraging an MCP server and leveraging AI under the hood to really, I guess, enhance your workflows. And the key takeaway, I guess, from what we just saw is that the best platform engineering isn't just about automation, it's about creating a good experience for developers who never want to go back to the old way. I know we had a little bit of trouble there when it came to the debug, but I'm sure we were still we were a lot quicker in terms of setting up the project, in terms of pushing code, changing the application code and getting feedback and being able to, I guess, work on that from a developer's perspective. And I think when your IDE knows about your pipeline, when AI can troubleshoot your builds, and when everything just works seamlessly, that's when you know you've built something special. Okay, so I guess we have probably touched on everything that I wanted to go through today. There's definitely a lot more that we could have got into in the platform when it comes to CircleCI, particularly around insights, was one thing that we might have touched on. We also did look at the beginning, we looked at how you can deprovision projects on CircleCI or provision them from the UI. So maybe you don't want to roll out an IDP across your organization. Maybe you just want to leverage the CircleCI for the UI. And we did see that very quickly, how that can be done. Insights, however, when it comes to DORA metrics on CircleCI, we do also have an insights dashboard. That's where you can start to get an insight into your throughput, into your success rate, into your duration, and all of that data is available to you on CircleCI. So maybe if there's no Q&A, I can quickly spin that up and show you what that looks like. But please, Q&A is now open, so please feel free to add in any questions. Want to thank you all for joining the webinar today. So what we've shown was basically a repeatable and secure way to bootstrap new app teams on CircleCI using Terraform, using GitHub. Okay, and just one Terraform apply, we were able to do all of that. We created a GitHub project, we set up a CircleCI project, we set up a project on CircleCI wired to that repo. We automatically applied context level secrets and access restrictions. We enforced best practice inside that config, which we saw, and we kicked off a pipeline. This gives platform teams a lot of benefits, which I'm sure you know, a consistent setup process, and also a fast path to onboard new teams. And from a developer's perspective, I hope you saw how quickly we were able to clone down a project, get into our development environments, get access to feedback from our pipelines, rerun pipelines, and look at the outcome of pipelines, and then of course leverage the CircleCI MCP server to understand why our pipelines behaved the way that they did. And of course, I'm sure we can all understand why this matters. Why this matters is this what we just walked through today can scale from onboarding one project to onboarding 1,000 projects. I'm going to take a quick look at
Derry, we do have a couple questions. I think now that you're at the end of the demo is a great time for one of them, which is how about cleaning up some of these things that we create? As a developer, we're able to create rapidly lots of projects, and maybe they get discarded or projects move on. How can we keep the platform utilized? So I think maybe a good chance to show off the deprovisioning pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, let's jump back over to our CircleCI UI here. I touched on briefly that maybe you don't want to leverage an IDP to be that self-service model. Maybe you just want to use CircleCI as the UI. So let's jump into our platform teams config. We look at our pipelines, okay? And what we're going to notice here is that we have 3 pipelines, okay? We have a config policies pipeline, which is used to roll out our config policies, apply them, make them active on the organization. We have a provision pipeline, and we have a deprovision pipeline, okay? And what we can do here is we know with the provision pipeline, that just ran a Terraform apply. However, with a deprovision pipeline, what we're going to do is just run a Terraform destroy under the hood on the same stack. So if I jump over to deprovision, what I can do here is I can add the target repo. Let me just jump over to GitHub to make sure that I spell this correctly. Oh, back over. Oh, where are we? In here, I can provide that like so, and I can run this pipeline. And very easily, very quickly then, developers, platform teams, whoever has access or whoever has the need can just tear down everything that we just created. Now, I hope nobody had any other questions around wanting to see more about what we did just create. Maybe I can use an older project as an example, because this project is now being created. It's being torn down. It's deprovisioning everything that we just created. Everything that was created by Terraform is now going to be destroyed. And while that runs, I'll take a look at a couple of other questions, and then maybe I can go back and show you that, just to prove to you that that destroy happened. So
I think another great question, Derry, is talking about kind of day 2 operations or drift. And so the idea that as potentially that central team's design of platforms or pipelines matures, what are ways that we can kind of extend or manage that? So we have the context of what you showed us today. What if that underlying template changes? What is that process like for the platform team?
awesome. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a great question, particularly around the use case that we saw, because we just looked at, we had a pretty baseline config built out of the box. It just had a build, test, and deploy job that just basically spat out or echoed out whatever the job was doing. But maybe platform teams want to build on that. Maybe platform teams want to provide security scans that are baked in. Maybe platform teams want to provide a governance gates pipeline that must be run, or jobs that must be run by the developers. And the great thing about this process is that it's all maintained inside this single configuration inside the platform team's config. They can go and they can create a branch, they can create a pull request then into the main branch to say, hey, let's add in a governance gate job and let's not override that. Let's not give the developers the ability to override that. And I guess that's really where day two can go. Maybe they'll want to provide a build job or a build baseline out of the box that developers can then go and add to, but something meaningful. Um, Also here, testing job. Let's provide developers with a baseline testing job for that framework. Again, these are day two operations. And the key thing about this is that it's all owned, it's maintained, and it's hydrated in this single place, in this single config file inside that platform team's repository that can then be inherited by the developers.
Another quick question, Derry. Are we required to use Terraform to provision projects in CircleCI?
Um, Absolute no, you are not required to use Terraform. So we do this, what we demoed today, was just using CircleCI's brand new Terraform provider. It's a super cool way that a lot of platform teams are that we just walked through actually are looking to, I guess, leverage into infrastructure as code to provision pipelines, to provision projects, but you are not required to do that. You can do so manually through the UI. You could create a pipeline that just uses CircleCI config and uses the CircleCI API to create projects and create pipelines. Multiple ways that you can look at exploring creating CircleCI pipelines and projects for sure. Not required to use Terraform or infrastructure as code.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Derry. A little bit of a CircleCI specific question. A few folks have asked about coming from Jenkins. If you want to quickly summarize key differences between CircleCI and Jenkins.
Yeah, for sure. That's not like you, Eddie, to put me on the spot, right? So no, I guess look, when you come from CircleCI to Jenkins, and it's probably something that I should have highlighted at the start of the call when I introduced CircleCI. Um, we have different hosting models, okay? Where you have basically a self-hosted model like Jenkins, where you can host, maintain, secure, scale CircleCI yourself inside a Kubernetes cluster. You then have our SaaS product where the CircleCI will own and maintain everything that I just mentioned for you. And this is probably the real benefit of CircleCI, as all of that time for folks who are leveraging Jenkins today, that you spend, I guess, scaling, securing, trying to roll out Jenkins shared libraries or Jenkins plugins. You're passing all of that over to CircleCI. So your developers and your platform engineers can really work on more meaningful stuff. Folks who use a self-service, self-hosted solution, we know about all the red tape that can exist. We also know about how much downtime and how much time you actually just need to spend making sure that our CI/CD solution is up and running for our developers. So leveraging a SaaS model, leveraging CircleCI in that mindset, is really a core benefit to CircleCI over Jenkins. But maybe you just can't do that. Maybe there's some red tape there that you need to self-host a solution yourself. And that's where we can really start to explore a hybrid model. And that's where CircleCI will own and maintain things like the own and host the build orchestrator under the hood, and maybe the UI, but all of the infrastructure of an individual job that can actually be all hosted inside your own environment. So we can see here that we're leveraging the CircleCI SaaS or leveraging the CircleCI cloud version. If this will open up, let me jump back over to another pipeline because it might make a little bit more sense. This is one I created just to make sure that the demo was up and running before the call. This is our CircleCI workflow. These are our job orchestrators. These are all individual jobs. I could, for some reason, I could have the build and test job running on CircleCI hosted compute, But maybe the deploy job I want to run on my own self-hosted environment for security, for compliance reasons. I need to interact with a database that's on my self-hosted environment, whatever that it is. This could run on site in your own infrastructure. So that's where CircleCI's hybrid model really comes to the fore. And that's where CircleCI really, I guess, is a benefit, or CircleCI really from my experience, wins over Jenkins. When you don't need to host up the solution yourself, when you can pass all of that over to a SaaS provider like CircleCI, that's one way. And then, of course, when you really want to dig into speed, when you really want to reduce workflow duration, CircleCI is a host of list of features out of the box available to you, on top of some of the other things high level that we would have walked through today. But yeah, there's a few things I think high level where you can really see the benefits of a tool like CircleCI over Jenkins.
Awesome. We had a question in the chat regarding config policies. Does config policies only apply to these new projects provisioned through the pipelines, or can you enforce policy on existing pipelines?
So so you can definitely enforce policies on existing pipelines. Yes, absolutely. You can set policies that exist at the organization level, or you can set policies that will just exist for an individual project. So you're able to expose individual project metadata if you just want to apply a policy to an individual project, for example. However, policies by default will, once applied to your organization, will be active across your organization on all projects.
Awesome. I think that's about it for unanswered questions. If other folks want to drop some additional questions in the Q&A, we have a couple minutes left.
Awesome. Well, folks, if there is no questions, folks might start dropping off. Again, I do really appreciate you all joining today, and hope you got a good idea of how you can manage, I guess, start to leverage CircleCI to manage the provisioning of projects. That story of a platform team wanting to just provide a centralized location for developers to roll out and start getting projects up and running with guardrails baked in. So yeah, really enjoyed being able to share this story with you all today. And yeah, hopefully we'll hear from you again, and please feel free to reach out.